seem like it, right? But I've definitely seen a couple people saying, you know what, yes, actually World War III has begun. We're just not fighting very hard. For me, that kind of disproves the fact that we're in a war, a world war. If you're really not fighting it, and you're just going, yeah, we're just jostling for this and that, but you know what, we're really just not even fighting at all. Can you really describe that as a war? I don't know. But let's see with Yaroslav Trofimov has to say. This is from the Wall Street Journal. An axis of autocracies led by Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea is challenging the democratic world order. As Syrian rebels approached Damascus last weekend, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov dismissed the fall of Bashar al-Assad, Moscow's main Arab ally, as a minor episode in a planet-wide struggle. The West, Lavrov said, clings to America's decaying hegemony, but is inexorably losing ground to the free world. His Orwellian term for the axis of autocracies led by Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran. The fight of these two worlds, one phasing out and another emerging, is not going without clashes, he remarked at a conference in Qatar. Interesting. Though leaders in the West may scoff at Lavrov's attempt to downplay Moscow's geopolitical setback in Syria, they broadly agree with his view that the world is increasingly split into two rival camps. With Russia's war in Ukraine nearly 3 years old, that is crazy. That is one of those things where you go, I mean, again, we're not in it unless you're, you've been on the ground fighting in it, unless you're in Russia or Ukraine or have people that, I feel like even if you have people that are in it, if you're not in those areas, it doesn't feel like we've been fighting in a war for 3 years, The Middle East ablaze on multiple fronts, and tensions building up in East Asia, conflicts once thought to be disconnected, have merged into what could be the opening shots of a third world war. If that's the case, would this just, historically speaking, let's say in 100 years someone's writing the history of World War III, and this is World War III. Is the Russia-Ukraine stuff, would that be just thought of, as the initial front of the war before the rest of the world joins in? It's just, this is the prologue. It's part of the book. It's part of World War III. But it's not, chapter 1. Or would they think about it as, no, this was not actually World War III. This was the inciting event. This isn't actually part of it. Like the assassination of Franz Ferdinand. That was not, World War I. That was the inciting event. But that was not World War I. It's the era of global confrontation, Czech Foreign Minister Jan Lipovsky said. The violence happening right now in the world proves one thing. We don't have any more of the conflicts that are separated from each other, and that could be handled separately. There is one common effort to destroy the international order, and we have to do everything to prevent that. The recent arrival of North Korean troops to fight for Russia in Ukraine, he added, has made this linkage clear. Okay, can we be honest here? While the involvement of North Korean troops does signal something, are they really going to make a difference? Like, is North Korea a legitimate military power that can effect change on a global scale? They can't feed their own citizens without the backing backing of other nations. They literally cannot feed their own nation. I'm sorry, as we all know, an army fights on its stomach, okay? You disrupt supply lines, you can't get food to them, they're not fighting, okay? I gotta be honest here, North Korean troops, while it is not great that they're, taking a side, although they've been on that same side, it's not changing battle lines, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't see the North Korean, reinforcements as going, oh, this is going to change the landscape of war in Russia and Ukraine. It's not. It's not. Just a decade ago, Russia and China cooperated with the U.S. and Western allies to contain the rogue regimes of Iran and North Korea, voting for a UN Security Council resolution on Tehran's nuclear program in 2015 and sanctions against Pyongyang in 2017. Since then, however, all four countries have been brought together by their separate conflicts with the West. Difficult to really get into this. Now again, if you were to say, they cooperated with these things to do these things, yeah, I guess, kind of, but again, was there a global order then? Were Russia and China and the US and the rest of the West totally united in their cause against these two rogue nations? Or were they doing something that they thought would benefit their own individual nations? If you think the US did that, if you think, hey, you know what, the US entered into these things to advance its own agenda, then you would be foolish to think that Russia, China, and all of these other, powerful Western countries weren't doing the exact same thing. Of course they were. The autocratic axis, a turning point for a closer partnership among these autocracies, came in 2014 when the West responded to Russia's first invasion of Ukraine only with mild sanctions. Under Obama, convincing Putin of the democracy's weakness. Kind of difficult. The following year, Russia and Iran joined hands in Syria to rescue the Assad regime from a looming collapse. Cut off from some Western technologies, Russia also became increasingly dependent on China. Yeah. Bonds among the four countries were cemented by the 2022 invasion of Ukraine, a war that Russia is fighting with indispensable Chinese support and weapons from North Korea and Iran. A Russian veto last March essentially ended the enforcement of UN sanctions on North Korea that Moscow itself once endorsed. And the two nations signed a mutual defense treaty months later. Russia's cooperation with Iran also turned more strategic, with Moscow and Tehran putting the finishing touches on a comprehensive treaty that includes defense cooperation. Look, it's hard for me to not bang on about the fact that, hey, this first invasion of Ukraine, second invasion of Ukraine, all of these, new wars, Chinese support, the bringing together of the Russia and China and all these things happened under Obama and Biden is kind of just Obama 2.0. It has all the same, powers in the cabinet. Tony Blinken is, Secretary of State, doing the same things, advancing the same policies, and guess what? We're pushing, these two other countries together. It's difficult for me to bang on about this, and not touch on the fact that, hey, was this happening under Trump? It doesn't seem like it. Maybe it was. Please please let me know in the comments where and how I'm wrong. I'm fine with that, but yeah, look, it does seem to be the case. As political inhibitions and concerns about a Western reaction faded away, members of the Axis started sharing sophisticated military technologies to fill gaps in each other's strategic capabilities. Moves that have made each of them a more dangerous adversary in their own neighborhood. Big power rivalry is accelerating and driving the world apart, said Wang Huiyao, president of the Center for China and Globalization think tank in Beijing and a former Chinese government advisor. We are probably on the brink of World War III. You have a spillover of the Russia-Ukraine war, of the Gaza war, and Syria is just another domino. We need to be really careful not to have more dominoes. Now, let's take the things that Wang Huiyao, I'm probably mispronouncing that, I'm sure, I'm definitely not intoning it correctly, but let's take the things that they're saying with a little bit of salt here, perhaps a large grain of salt, because president for the Center of China and Globalization think tank in Beijing and a former Chinese government advisor. So this guy is still working for China, let's be honest here, and is definitely still advancing the agenda of the Chinese government, and therefore driving up fears and saying, hey look, stuff's really bad, we need to make sure, we need to do everything possible to not make sure that there's not any more dominoes, and hey look, this thing is a domino, we need to make sure this doesn't fall over. Okay, well, the way that you want to make sure that domino doesn't fall over just so happens to massively advantage China and the interests of the Chinese government. So, can we really trust that you're not just kind of doing this as a propaganda move? It's certainly true that having a lot of, regional conflicts is not good, and those regional conflicts could spill over and become larger conflicts. But the fear-mongering, I don't think this person's really that wildly concerned about the rest of the world. It just doesn't seem, to have been the case. Divided democracies. Today, Russia and China are revisionist powers dreaming of past imperial glories, seeking to build or restore their spheres of influence and redress what they perceive as historical injustices, such as the loss of Ukraine or Taiwan. To this axis and to its lesser clients from Venezuela to Belarus, the so-called rules-based international order is merely a tool to disguise American domination. They believe that rolling back Western political and economic influence and Western-promoted norms such as liberal democracy is only natural given the shrinking share of Western democracies in the global economy and population. This is also a delightful optics strategy, a propaganda strategy of saying, hey look, the reason these things exist is because of the evil American empire, and that's the only reason they exist, and therefore, because the evil American empire is associated with Western liberal ideas and ideologies, those are also bad and tainted and should be gotten rid of. It's, it's a good optic strategy to link something that is an obstacle to your power, the sort of liberal democracy, democratic values, with something that is easy to paint as evil, such as the evil American empire. And I gotta be honest, a lot of people in the West are happily promoting the idea of, at the very least, the West and America is an evil empire. Yeah, so that ideology, whether you like it or not, and whether it's true or not, it does help people that are absolutely opposed to any kind of liberal democracy. So, do please think about that the next time you're espousing the evils of the American empire. President-elect Donald Trump, who takes office on January 20th, has promised to negotiate an end to the war in Ukraine and to impose peace through strength. Yes, peace through strength is kind of inflammatory, but I don't know of any other real kind of peace. You know, in terms of geopolitics, peace through consensus, that's kind of what they're saying is bad. The rules-based international order, well, that's just peace through strength, cloaked in consensus and, diplomacy. To impose peace through strength elsewhere in the world, deterring rivals like China. Trump's first-term attempt to strike a deal with North Korea ended in failure, however, and it's far from certain that he will be able to find common ground with Moscow. I honestly don't remember what deal he was trying to strike with North Korea. Please let me know in the comments what it was. I straight up don't remember. I guess he didn't come away with a deal, but what I remember from that is that he opened up dialogue with North Korea, and that's how I remember being portrayed. Is that was the big thing? Is the fact that he went to North Korea or wherever, and spoke with him, was an opening of line of dialogue, and that was the big deal. I don't know what deal he was trying to strike. So yeah, again, I got a lot of homework for you in this video. But yeah, that's another thing. Please leave that in the comments. Still, American allies in Europe are increasingly alarmed that a Trump effort to reach a grand bargain with Russia may come at the expense of their own security. So now they're worried about their own stuff. Okay. America's partners are also worried about being hit with tariffs that could seriously hurt their economy. The unity of the autocracies is perhaps stronger than the unity of democracies at this moment. That's kind of always going to be the case, and that's one of the trade-offs. Autocracies are inherently more unified because they're a top-down autocracy. A democracy inherently has different factions. Not that autocracies don't have different factions, but democracies have different factions that have enshrined political power. Said General Onno Eichelheim, the Netherlands chief of defense. There is a fight between autocracies and democracies, and the autocracies have a winning hand. That's a bit hyperbolic, to be honest. China's leader Xi Jinping highlighted the crumbling of the post-World War II international system during his October meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin in the Russian city of Kazan. The world today is facing momentous transformations unseen in a century, Xi said. The summit was intended by many world leaders and the Secretary General of the UN, illustrating Western failure to isolate the Kremlin. Okay, fair. Some norms that applied throughout the Cold War have already been broken. The territory of one global power is being struck with missiles provided by another. Are we talking about? Is that talk about Israel? Because I feel like they've been hit by missiles and rockets for a while. But no, they're talking about Russia and Ukraine in recent months repeatedly hit military installations inside Russia with American ATACMS missiles in an attempt to repel a Russian invasion that has used artillery, drones, and missiles from North Korea and Iran. The slight difference being that the American missiles require American support. The arms from North Korea and Iran, they don't require North Korean and Iranian support. It's, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying, either are good, but there is a slight difference in the full, context of these things. guess this is because I'm not in Europe, but I'm not aware of all of these. What specifically is this referring to? I straight up don't know. And again, this is because I'm in America, and the attacks on Russian, the Russian attacks on industries and infrastructure and these types of things. The only stuff we ever heard about was Russia interfering in elections. That's kind of the only stuff that the news ever ran. Russia's destabilizing attacks inside NATO countries, including sabotage, assassination plots, and arson, are at levels we have never seen, at least since the end of the Cold War, said James Aparthurai, NATO's Assistant Secretary General for Innovation, Hybrid, and Cyber Threats. And they are getting even more effective at using new tools like cyber attacks and ransomware to disrupt our societies. So this isn't actually something new. It's just something we haven't seen in, 30 years since the fall of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War. So it's not, again, not that it's good, but it's not brand new. War by proxy. Despite this escalation, the major powers are not fighting one another directly, at least not yet. It's not a world war by any stretch of imagination. It's still a proxy war. Agreed, absolutely, said Senator James Risch, a Republican from Idaho, who is slated to become chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee next year. Okay, so before you jump down my throat and say, oh yeah, a Republican said, I didn't know a Republican said that. That is just my general feel of this. It's not involving the whole world. The whole world is not embroiled in conflict. It's just that the whole world absolutely is affected by regional conflicts because we are a globalized society. And what happens to one country affects what happens in another country. That's really not new, though. It's just slightly easier and way more necessary to track those changes. Like, hey, like we've got gas prices. If you want to make a pencil, or the mines making the copper, pulling out the blah, 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 blah. Yeah, all of these things are going to affect everything else because we're so interconnected. So the geopolitical ramifications of any one thing are inherently going to be global, aka geo, as in Earth, geopolitical. The spectacular collapse of Assad's tyranny in Syria showcased just how interconnected different theaters of conflict have become. In 2015, Russia intervened militarily in Syria's civil war to rescue the regime. But this time, the Russians were too weakened by their losses in Ukraine to gather a force that could repel the Syrian rebels' surprise offensive. Iran and its proxies were also unable to help Assad, having been battered by more than a year of fighting with US-backed Israel. Now the future of Russia's naval and air bases in Syria, which are indispensable for Russian military operation in several African nations, is uncertain at best. For Iran, the fall of Assad also means the breakup of its own axis of resistance, which stretched through Iraq and Syria to the Hezbollah militia in Lebanon. There is no axis without access, said Ali Fayez, Iran project director at the International Crisis Group, and the loss of credibility to defend allies has a contagious effect on the ones who are still standing. But Assad's fall represents only a tactical loss for the converging autocratic powers. On the front that matters most, in Ukraine, momentum has shifted to Moscow's side in the past year, in large part because of ammunition and weapons supplied to Russia by North Korea and Iran, and since October an infusion of some 12,000 North Korean troops. While those forces may provide an immediate boost to the embattled Russian military on the Ukrainian front, the lessons they are currently learning about modern warfare against American weapons pose a much greater danger to South Korea in the medium term, according to a senior South Korean military official. This is true, but South Korea is a straight up ally. I don't see like, okay, hey, we can't really be sure if we want to provide South Korea with weapons or troops or any of this kind of support. You know, they're kind of they're in a weird position of this kind of, and it's like, nah, like, I mean, it'd be kind of just immediate. And again, I mean, maybe you'd say it'd be a proxy war because, you know, North Korea is China-backed, South Korea is U.S.-backed, and therefore it's, you know, actually the U.S. and China fighting. Sure. But again, that would be, I mean, look, if China's going to be doing that, they're not going to be doing a proxy war. North Korea, South Korea, they're going to be going after Taiwan. And you'd have, you know, a real war of China fighting against Taiwan and the U.S. North Korea kind of, you know, not really going to be as important in there. Still more important for Russia's war is the backing provided by China. China didn't just help the Russian economy, it also helped rebuild the Russian military, which is becoming more and more advanced because of Chinese technological support, said Nuri Turkel, a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute and a prominent campaigner for the rights of China's Uyghur minority. The more chaos the West and the United States get dragged into, the better it is for Russia and China. Yes, that's true, but generally speaking, if there's more chaos for the West and the U.S., there's also going to be more chaos for Russia and China, as is currently happening. I mean, it would be difficult for you to say, hey, Russia in a current war with Ukraine is in less chaos than the U.S., who's essentially, yes, pumping money over to Ukraine, but in general, not actively, you know, involved in it, in the sense of boots on the ground and yada yada yada. Although that is, again, changing a little bit, but yeah, it's difficult to say Russia's in more chaos than the U.S. You know, just keep things in perspective. U.S. officials estimate that some 90% of semiconductors and 70% of machine tools used by Russian military industries currently come from China. So far, Beijing has stopped short of directly supplying lethal weapons, though it is shipping large quantities of dual-use goods, they say. An anti-American alliance, let me just actually see how much longer there is in this. Okay, I wasn't sure. An anti-American alliance, Zhang Weiwei, director of the China Institute at Fudan University in Shanghai, argued that Beijing and Moscow are coming together as a defensive reaction to American hostility. Of course, we want to make it look good. We're not coming together to be aggressive. This is defensive. It's not our fault, it's your fault. Everybody says that. Because of the hawkish policy adopted by the U.S. towards Russia and towards China, of course, China and Russia have become closer to each other. This is only natural. And by the way, the two countries also have lots of domestic support for good relations between them. And economically, they are complementary. Who is to blame? The United States is to blame. The same logic applies to Iran, added Syed Imamian, co-founder of the governance and policy think tank in Tehran. The military's security complex in Washington is strategically directed towards containing and to some extent isolating the three important powers, China, Russia, and Iran, from each other. It's fun that Iran is, it's the three important powers. It's China, Russia, and Iran. Come on, Iran, you're getting a little big for your britches there. You're not Russia or China. Joint cooperation is needed to contain the threat that come from NATO as a whole and from the U.S. security and military establishment in particular. The fact that Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea have different political systems and ideologies and aren't joined by a formal alliance like NATO had lulled Western governments into complacency, said Andrew Shearer, Australia's chief of national intelligence. That's fair, but I mean, I gotta be honest. If the fact that they didn't have a formal alliance tricked the CIA and all intelligence operatives in all of these Western governments, they're all idiots and should be fired. I'm sorry. If you got, whoa, I had no idea. They didn't didn't sign a thing. I had no idea you could be allies and not have a piece of paper between. Yeah, you need to be fired. You're idiotically stupid. So I don't think it's actually true. I think, you got caught with your, things are happening that you don't like, and therefore we're going, it's because these guys are so smart. No, it's just, things happen that you didn't like. That's kind of just the way the world works sometimes. We have collectively perhaps underestimated the magnitude of this emerging axis and the strategic impact it's having on all of us. He warned in remarks at the Halifax International Security Forum in Canada last month. We fell into the trap of looking at each component in isolation and not seeing the linkages between them and the deep connectivity between one theater and another. We haven't adjusted our mindset and taken on board the scale of their strategic ambitions. Again, it's not like they were hiding their strategic ambitions here, so I can't imagine you didn't see this coming as a possibility. If you did, you're dumb. Alright? Indeed, Western planners hadn't taken into account the simple fact that a railroad runs all the way from Pyongyang to Russia's border with Ukraine, making it possible to ferry North Korean troops, artillery, missiles, and ammunition deep into Europe. Did that railroad just appear out of nowhere? Did they hide the construction of it? Scherer points out that the Axis powers during World War II, Nazi Germany, Italy, and Japan, also disagreed on key issues. For instance, Japan didn't share Hitler's desire to exterminate Jews and didn't join his attack on the Soviet Union. Yet acting together, these nations came frighteningly close to overrunning Europe and Asia. They were defeated largely because the U.S. possessed the planet's mightiest industrial base. Is the U.S. prepared? That is no longer the case. As China builds up its military might, the U.S. is already hard-pressed to keep supplying weapons to its partners in Ukraine and the Middle East. Orders for Taiwan are getting delayed. Orders from Taiwan? I don't know. Through U.S. military output, though U.S. military output increased after the 2022 invasion of Ukraine, the growth lagged far behind the rapid expenditure of munitions and concentrated on particular products, such as 155mm artillery shells. We are in no way prepared from an industrial standpoint to compete effectively absent radical change, said Robert Greenway, director of the Allison Center for National Security at the Heritage Foundation and a former senior official in the Trump White House. We have to look at industrial capacity and output as a function of national security, first and foremost. Yeah, again, if we want to be supplying all of these things and doing all of this stuff, then yeah, that's true. I don't know if we need to be doing that. I'm all for, making the U.S. totally self-sufficient in terms of industry. We've got a lot of resources. We've got a lot of, breadth of resources. So certainly it is possible to make a lot more stuff in the U.S. than we do. It will be more expensive, but, it's certainly in a lot of areas totally a, thing worth doing. In a report released in July, the congressionally mandated Commission on the National Defense Strategy found that China is outpacing the U.S. when it comes to military production, and that America's defense industrial base is unable to meet the need of the U.S. and allies. The U.S. military lacks both the capabilities and the capacity required to be confident it can deter and prevail in combat. That really depends on how you want to look at the U.S. military capacity and all that kind of stuff. Like, again, does it lack the capability to defend the borders of America if it's attacked? No, not even close. In no way, shape, or form does it lack that. It absolutely has that. Should we absolutely have the strength to do that and totally deter any kind of, attacks or any of these types of things? Yes, absolutely. But if the U.S. military is policing the entire world, okay, yeah, we kind of lack that stuff. Is that something we want to be doing? To be honest, there's definitely an argument to be made for it. If there has to be a world policeman, the U.S. is, kind of the best option. But, yeah, I'm kind of like, no, I don't really want that to be the case, because security for is just, it's too tempting. Yeah. 3 of the 4 revisionist autocracies, Russia, China, and North Korea, already possess nuclear weapons, while the 4th, Iran, is only weeks away from a nuclear breakthrough should it choose to obtain the bomb, according to U.S. government estimates. There is a certain transactional symbiosis among them, where each fulfills the needs of the other, said U.S. Navy Admiral Samuel Paparo, the commander of the Indo-Pacific Command. To think that we will be able to drive a wedge between them is a fantasy. That's definitely not a fantasy. You could absolutely do it. It's completely possible to drive a wedge between these people. The wedge is already there. It just needs to be hammered in. Okay? All of these things, yeah, like they all want, like let's say Russia and China, they both want to rule the world, right? Okay, well guess what? There's only one world to rule. These are neighbors. They both want, they both have imperial, territorial conquest ideas. They're running up against one another. They're, going to be competing for resources. The wedge is there. Okay? It's just the wedge between, them and other nations is already, hammered in a bit deeper. But yeah, to say that, you couldn't break up an alliance between these people is a fantasy. That's just absolutely not the case. The U.S. military said has already been forced to rethink its strategy because it expects Russia to provide China with submarine technology that could erode American undersea dominance and to supply North Korea with missile and submarine technology that would allow Pyongyang to threaten American territory. This is an axis of evil that is working together and for a long time now, said Ukraine's Deputy Minister of Defense, Sergei Boyev. This global alliance is currently furthering the aggression against Ukraine, but it also has many additional targets. Yeah, I think that's all fair. Now, has World War III already begun? No. I think no. Again, this is basically just looking at the current, U.S. strategy is pushing some of our adversaries, ideological adversaries, together more than keeping them apart. So what do we want to do? We should probably change that policy and make it a little bit less, attractive for China to be with Russia, Russia to be with North Korea, North Korea to be with Iran. Yeah, we should make it a little bit, if again, we want to compete in the geopolitical grand strategy, rule the world type stuff, well then, you gotta change your policy. Now, should we be taking part in that grand strategy of we want to rule the world and here's our place in the world, we want to maintain 100% superpower dominance? I don't really care to. As much as, it I suppose, certainly confers an advantage on America and Americans. I kind of think we could probably get most of that advantage through free trade and, these other types of things that are not as forceful, but are almost as effective and in some ways big advantages. You can't point to the big giant evil American empire and say this is why we're doing this stuff if there is no, evil American expansive empire. It just so happens that, hey, you know what? All of your trade, all of your economic decisions, well, the U.S. is so massively involved in those things that America has a leg up on you. That's my vision of how, America should stay the dominant power. But that might be naive. Maybe there has to be military force to back up that kind of, relative dominance in the world. Anyway, good luck in all guess you'll say.